in many of your incarnation cycles, and even when you're existing just as a soul, vibration becomes your means of communication completely. So here you talk, and of course that vibrates the sound, but there's a completely different experience when you're generating vibrations from your entire being, and it's not limited to language, it's actually infused consciousness. So it's like consciousness vibrates out of you, and then it touches you, and then you embrace and absorb that consciousness. So it's not just somebody saying, you know, the house is blue. It's the entire energetic of the blue house that you can actually bring into you, and it becomes part of you. It augments who you already are when you share consciousness vibrationally as a soul. This is one of the things we've been talking to you about, is about insouling your bodies, of course. And one of the things that comes along with that is gaining this wisdom your soul has. And one of the things that comes along with that is this ability to communicate vibrationally. And in your culture, that usually comes about with sound. But as your vibration gets high enough, we've talked about when your vibration gets high, you emanate ripples of high vibration. Well, imagine that you actually were able to modulate and, in essence, control those ripples that you send out. Then you have a completely new level of communication available to you, which is modeled on the communication style you use as a soul.
Is that what they call telepathy, like the Aborigines used?
Similar, yeah, similar. They've had to learn how to do that, given the distances that they experience. Mm-hmm. And the isolation they had for so long allowed them to excel in that area. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very similar to what they're doing. But even that is on a level of language, whereas what we're talking about is on a level of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that difference might be a little difficult to kind of absorb right now, but just knowing there's a difference there is enough for now. And when we get a little further down the road, we can talk about how that actually shows up. Mm-hmm. But when you start sharing conscious, not even just consciously, because that's conscious communication uses language, but when you start sharing consciousness, that's a completely different road to walk. This is why, you know, the sounds that you do, Margaret, are so special, is because you're sharing on a level that's outside of vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And you're actually sharing experience. You're sharing intuition. You're sharing inspiration. And you're able to infuse those things into sounds and let those sounds go, and you're able to receive them. And sometimes you feel like, wow, that was incredible. And sometimes it upsets you, and sometimes it makes you cry, whatever. But we don't imagine that you're quite to the point yet. Maybe you are, but we don't imagine you're quite to the point where you feel like you're actually infusing those sounds with the consciousness of who you are. So where if you needed to make the sounds that reflect the house you grew up in, that you could put the house you grew up into those sounds, and then actually have someone on the other side who could receive that and not only see the house you grew up in, but smell it and taste it and feel what it was like to be there. You understand what we're trying to say?
I do.
Mm-hmm. But that's the place that goes to, because that's the full body, full consciousness exchange. And that's where you have this clarity of, how should we say it? This clarity of, well, we said exchange, that's really the only word we can think of. The exchange between you is not just the filtered language. You know, I grew up in Minnesota in a house full of a bunch of kids, and it was crowded and hard to get attention from my parents, right? Instead, it's actually the experience of that going out as a vibration. Now, first you have to be able to send that out. Then you have to have people in your life that can receive it, and people in your life that are able to handle it. Because if you start sharing on that deep level, it can be very emotional, and it can be very, in a sense, overwhelming for people who aren't prepared. Just like you don't take little kids to see R-rated movies, because there's material in that they're not ready to absorb. Not everybody's ready to communicate on this level, but it is coming. This is how you actually are able to transform your society radically in an amazing way, is when you're able to have this kind of a communication system, communicating along the structural lines of the universe.
An altered state of consciousness, like a half an hour into a sound healing that I did today, a thought arose and it said, I wonder if what I'm singing is Quechua, like the Andes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I forgot that I had that thought. And then at the end, this woman was, the first thing she did when she opened her eyes was say, what was that language you were doing when you were doing the drum? And it was sort of, she couldn't think of what it was or anything.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't say it back to me.
Yeah.
But then a little while later she said, it sounded like Quechua when I was in Peru.
Yeah.
And so I think that what you're saying is that there's a sense of, when going deep into surrender, into an altered state of consciousness, you're actually really in a different
Mm-hmm.
dimension.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to, and it doesn't, for me, register into visions or brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
language
you can tap in altered states of consciousness. You can certainly tap into what some people call Akashic records. We would call the structure of the universe, or the wisdom of your soul, right? Because of course you've had lifetimes in Peru. That's not in question here.
Oh.
So you're tapping into the wisdom that you brought out of that lifetime, and your soul is giving you access to that information.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm. It would be interesting if you recorded some of your sound healings and had that, and then who knows what would happen someday when you played that back and they said, oh yes, you were giving your laundry list. I'm so happy to be doing this sound healing. It's so nice to be in this space. I hope I don't forget to buy some groceries later.
Well,
It's not quite that.
But it does feel as, after a while, the mind just sort of relaxes, and it's not so attached to, like if I do sounds here, it's just a few minutes and I'm not in an altered state yet. I'm still just.
The rest of them get into it though.
Oh. So.
But we want to make sure we're clear about that with you, is that just because you might be speaking Quechuanese or however that's said, doesn't mean you're saying anything necessarily profound.
Exactly.
It's just the beauty of connecting with the energetic of that lifetime.
Right.
It was a much simpler way of living. There were hard aspects to it, of course. So, there's no snow market. But there was that sense of belonging and community that you appreciate so deeply in this lifetime was very powerful in that lifetime. You had that was a very certain aspect of that lifetime. So when you bring through that languaging kind of information in your sound work, it's kind of like we said before. Instead of saying I grew up in Minnesota and this was my house, you're saying, oh, when I was in the community in Peru back a couple lifetimes ago, this is how we lived. Today we're making baskets. Just that simple.
Exactly.
Not
That's what it feels
confusing,
like.
not anything profound in the sense of like describing how a black hole works.
Right.
It's simply this. I had a lifetime as a human being that was very deeply involved in this community energy, and I'm bringing this community energy whole hog, like the whole thing consciously into this space and speaking of it so that it can trigger up in my client the experience of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's what it feels like.
Well, that's good. It's what it is. So it's good it feels like that too.